Welcome to Channel X TV, sponsored by Volo. Delighted to be joined today by Aaron Brooks, who heads up a creative agency called Vamp and works with an absolute ton of influencers, which we're going to speak a little bit about today. But welcome, Aaron. How are you?
Oh, very well, thanks, Chris. Thanks very much for having me on the show and on the channel, should I say. But yeah, doing well on this kind of gloomy Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah, it is a bit gloomy, and I spotted the Australian accent, but I don't think you're in Australia anymore. So tell us just a little bit about you and how you came to be working for Vamp in the UK.
Well, obviously, I co-founded the business, so we're headquartered out of Sydney, Australia, which is where myself and business partners originally started the company, and then we obviously ventured offshore after those kind of initial years and getting the business set up. And our first international office was actually in Singapore, and then we went kind of further abroad. So we have office in Dubai, and then obviously I'm up here now in London. So I obviously, yeah. Run the commercial team for the whole of Vamp, but I'm based up here in the UK.
Hmm. So let's talk about influencers and particularly about the kind of explosion in influencer marketing there's been in the run up to this Christmas. Um, why is it suddenly becoming so effective? What's going on basically? What do retailers and brands need to be aware of if they're missing out?
I think it's really just become, well, first of all, I mean, from our side, like it has grown so much, even since when I look back to when we first started the business back in 2015. I mean, you're talking about just a post in a feed, and Instagram, right? That was really the only channel. And then, you've obviously had the emergence of like YouTube, and then of course TikTok in the last few years, which has been massive. So really, I think the channel's been legitimized, which has been huge. And really, the main thing I would say is the platforms have really embraced creators. If you look at the way TikTok and Instagram and the features and capabilities that they've allowed for creators to utilize their tools and features, and obviously these are things that we've built into over time as well on our platform.
Mm.
It's really just allowed for a great way for creators to live and breathe across these platforms, create engaging content. Obviously, brand partnerships are an important part of that. But yeah, I really think that's really what's happened. And I think in the last few years in particular, it's moved from kind of like when we first started being very much top of the funnel metrics to now being very performance driven. So you can see now that brands are actually driving, bottom of the funnel metrics. So obviously, all brands are different in terms of the objectives they look at for different campaigns. But we are driving sales and conversions for some customers too. So it's much easier for brands to justify that spend. And I think these days, when we're in a difficult climate now, I think the last 18 months hasn't been easy. But I think that's why creator marketing has been resilient, because it is a performance driven channel, and brands can rely on it to drive bottom of the funnel outcomes for which is important.
So I want to come back to the top and bottom of the funnel in a little bit, but before we get there, I'd like to talk about how when people first started talking about influence, it was almost like I need an A-list celebrity, but nowadays influencers are and creators are people. Frankly, I've never heard of them until I see them. Um, what's driven that change from the celebrity endorsement to the influencer who is in many cases a real expert and enthusiast in a relatively small niche?
I really think it's been social that's driven that change. We've seen, of course, like you said, celebrity endorsement, right? When you kind of have those celebrities that kind of move from like, I guess, more like television and movies into social, it kind of doesn't really work, if I'm honest. And really, what social has done is allowed for these different creators who produce different types of content, have very different audiences, create authentic content, which is really just like genuine to how they talk to their own audience. And I really think it's been social that's changed the game for that and allowed for so many different people to showcase their own creative. And that could be anything from, how they, I don't know, like breakfast recipes to, like we were talking before we jumped on, like, which I think was pretty cool. And you're talking about these sisters that doing like, piece of content a day to promote Christmas.
Oh,
Like there's just so
the
many different
sugar
ways to
coated
do it.
sisters. If anyone wants to follow them on
Yeah.
TikTok, absolutely brilliant.
And so I think really it has been that. It's just been like, and I think also, of course, is social in itself, but then also the type of of content too, which drives that as well. Like people that are kind of skilled up on producing short form video and producing content for different ad formats across these different platforms as well. You know, as I mentioned, when Vamp first started, it was very much like a post in a feed. But now, you know, you look at like the different formats just in Instagram, whether it's like reels and stories, and you know, you've got different specialist creators that produce for different types of formats as well.
Hmm. So let's dig a little bit more into those formats. And I think that there's a big difference between the sort of the top of the funnel brand awareness and when you get right down to the bottom, which is sales conversion. I'm guessing for the brand awareness, you're probably going to be giving a creator with a large following a chunk of money to produce some content. Whereas at the bottom, where you're focusing on sales, you're probably going to be looking at something like an affiliate commission based on a certain percentage of each sale as a revenue. But what's the kind of sliding scale in between? And frankly, where should a brand start? And like, when they first start looking at influencers, should they be looking for the broad awareness on the platform, or should they be going immediately for the sales?
I think it obviously depends on the brand, right? Like I think if you looked at different categories, you've got like FMCG companies which don't necessarily have that e-commerce component, right? Because it's driven through third-party retailers. So everyone has a different objective for how they approach the channel and what they're looking to do. And then of course you have like, you know, the D2C brands, which are very like smaller agile marketing teams that are all about driving conversions and performance. So it really depends on the brand and what they're trying to achieve. But I think in terms of the sliding scale, like the way that the Vamp works, we're always paying creators based on them producing a certain type of asset. That's basically how we allocate it. So you know, if it's just a still image in a feed, it varies based on that compared to like video content, which is much more involved in terms of that asset production. So that kind of depends. We are definitely seeing like the affiliate thing kind of happen more and more, where they'll have, again, they'll get paid for per post, but they may have an affiliate link which they append to the content where they can actually drive further commission on any product that they push. So it's definitely getting much more sophisticated. And then, of course, you also have brands that are reusing the content. And this is something that we talked about since Vamp first started back in 2015, which was actually, you know, the amazing thing about creator marketing is the assets, right? And brands being able to reuse and repurpose that content. So, you know, taking that and then whether you're boosting it, you know, out of the creator feed to drive the performance element, but then also just reusing that content back into the brand feed and then running performance media off the back of that too. But also you can liberate it out of social, right? Like that's what we're seeing brands do. They can use it back onto their websites. They can use it into their email marketing programs. You know, we've had some really cool use cases of how then brands utilize the assets, which is, you know, I think is kind of like the really hidden value in creator marketing.
Mm. And I think that's really interesting, but I do want to touch on the lack of control and brand guidelines when you get into the influencer world. And especially, I think, when you get into the unpaid influencer world, the people that perhaps once upon a time would have gone on to Trustpilot and left you a review, but now they're doing an unboxing video, a using video, and potentially even a 6 months or a year later, oops, it broke video. How does a brand keep control of this, but still engage in a real way with the audience and accept that products break, products get open, people want new. How do they actually engage with these creators, and both the creators they're paying, but especially the creators that they're not paying?
Yeah, I mean, most of the stuff that we do, it's all paid work, if I'm honest, Chris. So we don't do any of that kind of like gifting, which obviously there are platforms out there that can help with that stuff, but everything that we do is paid. The one thing that we look for from brand safety is we actually have a vetted community of creators. So we don't have an open network. We don't have an open platform. Everyone that's on our platform and part of our community has been vetted, which adds a layer of brand safety. And then we have kind of things within the campaign process too, where, you know, of course, the creators are signed up to legal terms and conditions. There's do's and don'ts inside the brief to make sure that when they're producing content that it's, you know, they're not featuring competing brands or they're not doing things that they shouldn't be. And it's a tricky balance, right? Because you obviously want to make sure that the creator is following the brand guidelines in terms of that side of things, but also we want the creators to have creative freedom on the other side. Like we don't want the brands to be descriptive with how they produce the content. Like you want the creators to do it in the most authentic way possible for their followers. So it's a bit of a balancing act, but the brand safety thing is a big it's a big thing for us. Like obviously it was a big part of our go to market, and obviously it's helped us secure a lot of really big brands as well because they feel comfortable using creators that have kind of come through a closed network. We don't have, like I said, that no one, anyone can just sign up to the Vamp platform. And I think having that kind of closed network gives a lot of security to the brands that, if you're using creators through Vamp, then there's a lot of protection to make sure that the post or the creative at the other end of it's going to be exactly what the brand's after.
And how should brands sort of select creators to work with? Should they be looking for people in very specific niches that are obviously close fits for their products, or as the time come to cast the net wider and use creators in totally different fields that can interact with your product but also have a totally different audience to the people that you may normally connect with?
I think that's the exciting thing, Chris, about creator marketing, influencer marketing, is the latter, really. Like, brands being able to kind of go outside what they might deem as their typical profile of customer, and actually use creators that are kind of, like you said, in maybe different verticals, maybe a different age demographic. Like, I think that is pretty cool, and seeing the type of content and how the different messaging that comes across through those creators' eyes, I think is actually the really cool part. So, we try to get brands to do exactly that, right? Like not just go for kind of like, I guess what might be the normal type of profile of what they think their consumer looks like, and use creators that are, like you said, varying in terms of age demographic, location, but maybe interests as well. So, I mean, through our platform, we have the ability for creators to opt in. And we actually think that then kind of forms that sort of nice partnership where these guys have opted in to work on the brief or with the brand, which kind of means that they feel like there's some kind of affinity to that brand and that product. So partnering can sometimes show like some really, I guess, some magic, right, when you see the content at the other end of it.
And for brands that are working with creators, and especially as we move into 2024, what makes for really great content that kind of engages with consumers and produces results, whether that be awareness or actual sales? I mean, I'm constantly scrolling through TikTok, and I'm looking at some videos which are highly polished productions, and I'm looking at others which are almost like a mum in the kitchen with the air fryer showing how she's cooking the kids' tea, which is quite unpolished and raw, but perhaps in some ways even more effective. But is there a secret sauce or a balance between the two?
No, I think it depends on the creator, really. And I think that kind of like lo-fi sort of like, those quick, snappy, short form video really is what we see work really effectively. But also can depend on the channel too. Like if you kind of go back to like Instagram, most of the time the content is more polished for that channel, right? And that's just the type of content that you see there. Whereas TikTok is kind of much more snappy. And so I think it depends on the channel that you're using creators and producing for. But I think, like I said, it really is a lot of the time down to the creator, right? If you're working with creators that have a really large engaged audience, it really is up to them. I think they know best how to create the audience that best create the content, that best resonates with the audience. So we always try to tell the brands, you've really got to try to like, which to be honest, I think everyone kind of knows now, right? Like handing that creative license over to the creator and let them produce what they think's going to resonate best.
Mm. And where do you think we're going in 2024? Is it going to be the short form content? Are we going to see many more brands and creators going into longer live content? What do you see for the future, and what should we be thinking of for the new year?
Yeah, I think it changes so much, Chris. Like it's such a rapidly changing industry. I think obviously the long form stuff and some of the live stream stuff for some of the other markets, like in Asia, is obviously a big way that kind of draws eyeballs and gets conversions for brands. But I still see like the short form video for especially the market that we're in, UK, Europe, still being very prominent. That's going to drive sales for brands. So yeah, again, it depends on the channel a little bit, but I don't see too much changing, if I'm honest, in terms of like what's going to engage audiences. And I think you just kind of see more creators that kind of pop up and do things in more inventive ways, really. And really, it's about us trying to sort of like stay on trends and making sure that we're kind of having the right conversations with our clients about what's going on in these channels, and more importantly, finding out who the next kind of creators are that can drive exciting content for our customers.
And I think that's the challenge, is always finding the exciting creators. And on that, what do you think creators should be doing to support brands more? And should they be looking to upgrade their tech and get much more polished performances? Should they always be looking for sort of an angle or a joke or an edge for videos, or is just product demos enough? Should they be religiously sticking to their niche? So I mentioned a mum with air fryers. If they're generally doing cooking, should they be sticking to cooking, or should they stray out into other areas around the home?
Well, I think they should, stay definitely with what's working, right? Like I think if you're just producing, I don't know, food recipes for an air fryer, like that's what people are engaging with, right? So I think you'll find that a lot of the time though, creators are kind of like quality checking what videos are performing well, how engaged their audience is with certain types of videos. And I think if they start to potentially like maybe lose engagement on certain things, that it can inform decisions about the type of content they produce next. So I really think that the creators are so, I guess, for lack of a better term, all over that stuff. They're really highly engaged in what their audience wants. So, and they know, right, if even know what time to post, they know what content's resonating best. And I think if it's not resonating anymore, then they innovate and they change and they do something differently. But I think for the most part, if it's working, then that's generally what brands want to partner with creators for, right? They see like this backlog of amazing assets that they've produced, and they want to see somehow how that product could fit within that feed.
And final question: working with creators is always going to be tricky, especially as you're probably working not just with one or two, but with tens or even hundreds. And I know you're going to say work with an agency like Vamp can make your life a lot more easy. But what should brands be thinking about when they're looking to upscale their work with influencers and take on more and more partnerships? Is it like working with a traditional PR agency where you set out your brand guidelines? Or should they be a bit more relaxed when they're working with creators and have minimal brand guidelines and just let them run with it and show the product off to the best of their ability? Brands have got to be thinking about this. So where would you see them sitting? How do you engage with the creators to be as unintrusive as possible, but be as effective as possible?
Yeah, I think you've obviously got to make sure that you kind of have the right contracts in place where, the brand feels like there's some security there in terms of them, the creator making sure that they're going to do the correct amount of output or whatever the agreement is, right? That it's a certain amount of money per post over a certain time period.
Yeah, I was thinking less about the money per post or the financial arrangement, and more about the creativeness that comes out from the influencers.
They should definitely be as hands off as possible. I think what you want to do though is like get the brand ethos and vision across to the creator, like what you stand for. Those kind of things will help inform the type of creative that the creators produce. But really, it is about letting them produce the content that best resonates, right? Like you don't want to be, descriptive with how they produce it. I think that definitely stifles the creative element that the creator brings to these kind of briefs and projects and executions. So it really is just letting them produce it. And I think sometimes that can be a bit scary for brands, right? Because I think for the most part, and even like I said, in the early years of Vamp, I think it was a big education piece to a lot of brands to, to allow for that process to happen, because you're so used to in-house teams working with agencies being very descriptive about like how they go to market and what their brand looks like in the field, like all those sorts of things. So it really is a very different channel. But then I think also the brands that have got comfortable with it really enjoy that side of it, right? It's kind of like arm's length. And I think they kind of feel like it's kind of like this enjoyable piece that they can kind of watch happen inside social, and not worry too much about, trying to retrofit it back into like corporate guidelines. So I would say for sure, you've got to let them just produce it. And like I said, it's sometimes not an easy process to go through, but I think once brands get comfortable with it, they find a creator or two that they really like, that's produced a couple of assets that they go, well, that's amazing. Then obviously, of course, you get much more confident in the process.
Fantastic. Well, Aaron, I want to thank you so much for your time. And just before I let you go, favorite TikTok creator that you've seen for doing something Christmassy? Who should we go looking for?
Geez, I mean, it's to be honest, that's a tough one. I was going to say I'm probably more Instagram these days, but I would say like I love following some of the big like the brands. If I'm honest, like sometimes I think the way Red Bull and some of these other brands do social, I think is amazing. So yeah, I think that's probably. But I'm going to have to check out the one that you recommended. If I'm honest, that's probably what I can get onto.
So I've got to go and look at Red Bull, and you've got to go and look at the Sugar Coated Sisters. Aaron,
Exactly.
thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we'll catch up again sometime in the new year.
Sounds good, Chris. Thanks for having me.